I was reading a blog post by psychologist Nick Wignall the other day during one of my caffeine-fueled trips down the rabbit hole, and it really got me thinking about this tension many of us feel between creativity and discipline. We often imagine these two forces as opposing each other, like creativity is this wild, untamed energy that gets stifled by structure and rules. But what if that's completely backward? What if discipline is actually the key that unlocks consistent creativity? If you look at many of history's most prolific creators, you'll find surprisingly structured approaches to their work. We've all heard those stories about famous novelists who write at exactly the same time every day, and composers who take daily walks as part of their creative process, or inventors who schedule specific times for thinking and experimenting. In this episode, I want to share 4 powerful habits that can help bridge the gap between wanting to create and actually creating consistently. So let's dive in with habit number 1, preparing your creative runway the day before. Think about the last time you sat down to create something. What was the hardest part? For most of us, it's simply getting started. That initial resistance can be enormous, right? You stare at the blank page, the empty canvas, the quiet recording studio, and something in your brain just freezes up. Here's where smart preparation comes in. The night before a creative session, take 15 to 20 minutes to outline what you'll work on. Don't get sucked into actually doing the work, which is incredibly tempting. Just write down a rough idea of what you'll be focusing on. If you're a writer, sketch out the structure of your article or the scene you'll write tomorrow. If you're a designer, outline the basic elements of your project. If you're a composer, like me, maybe decide which section of a composition you'll be focusing on. You can do this in a to-do list or on a sticky note, whatever makes sense for you. But pre-select the ideas you want to start working on the next day. What this does is create a kind of runway for your creativity to take off from. When you sit down the next day, you're not starting cold. You've already given your subconscious mind something to work on, and you've eliminated the decision fatigue that often leads to procrastination. I started doing this about a year ago, and it's honestly transformed my workflow. I find I can get into the flow state much faster because I'm not wasting mental energy figuring out where to begin. The second habit of highly disciplined creative people is something I've talked about, but probably not nearly enough: creating a consistent warm-up ritual. Think about professional athletes before a big game or competition. They don't just walk out onto the field and immediately perform at peak level. They have specific warm-up routines that prepare their bodies and their minds for what's coming. I think creative work deserves the same kind of intentional preparation. A warm-up ritual signals to your brain that it's time to shift into creative mode. It helps quiet that critical inner voice that we all have. You know, the one that loves to tell you how terrible your ideas are before you even do anything. It doesn't need to be elaborate. Maybe it's brewing a specific tea and taking 3 deep breaths before you begin. Or maybe it's listening to a particular song or a playlist. Maybe it's 5 minutes of free writing or sketching without judgment. The specific activity matters less than the consistency. What's important is that you do the same thing every time before you create. Over time, your brain builds a powerful association between that ritual and entering a creative state. It becomes a trigger that helps you transition more smoothly into your work. My own ritual involves a few minutes of improvisation on the piano without any sort of expectation of anything good. In a way, the worse the better, because, that sounds weird, but because it feels like I get the bad ideas out of the way. It's simple, but it works amazingly well to put my brain into that creative mode. Now let's talk about the third habit, which might be my favorite because it's so counterintuitive: changing how you relate to procrastination. We all feel the urge to procrastinate, especially when facing challenging creative work. But here's where so many of us go wrong. We criticize ourselves for having these feelings. Why can't I just focus? What's wrong with me? This self-judgment actually makes procrastination worse because now you're dealing with not just the initial resistance, but also a layer of shame and frustration. It's like trying to put out a fire by throwing gasoline on it. But if you recognize the urge to procrastinate as normal and understandable, you can validate it rather than fighting it. When you feel that pull towards distraction, try saying to yourself, I'm feeling the urge to check social media or whatever right now instead of working on my project. That's completely normal. Creative work is challenging, and my brain is looking for relief. I don't need to judge myself for this feeling. Just acknowledging the feeling without acting on it creates a small space, a moment of choice where you can decide what happens next. And sometimes the best thing to do is to give in, but in a controlled way. I did an episode a few weeks ago inspired by neuroscientist Anne-Laure Lecompte's idea of curiosity snacks, where she talks about the need for curated distractions or healthy snacks for when we need a break. So maybe we don't blow off work altogether, but giving ourselves permission to do something for a limited amount of time scratches that itch and allows us to refocus. Fighting against it can result in more unfocused work and much more unpleasant wasted time. I've noticed in my own work that self-compassion is actually far more effective than self-criticism when it comes to staying focused. Treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a friend who's struggling helps you to move through resistance rather than getting stuck in it. The fourth habit of highly disciplined creative people is something I see the masters of every field doing: protecting their creative time by quarantining Busywork. If you tracked how most people approach creative projects, you'd see a chaotic pattern. 5 minutes of deep work, then checking email, then back to the project for 20 minutes, then answering a text, then 10 more minutes of work, then scheduling an appointment. It's no wonder we struggle to get into the flow state. This is the basis of Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, which drills down into the benefits of uninterrupted work. If you can imagine that your creative self is like having a child, and all children need attention. As a parent, you hear the phrase quality time a lot. It's important to focus on them when you're spending time together, which is not always possible, but we try to do it as much as we can so that they feel that stability, so that they feel loved and valued. If you're constantly checking your email when you're with them, that communicates something else entirely. It's similar with creative work. It's a question of quality time with your creative self versus going through the motions while you're trying to multitask. Eventually, your creative self will get tired of you if you don't pay attention to it. It will stop trying to get your attention. Disciplined artists and creative professionals understand that context switching is incredibly costly for creative work. Every time you shift from your creative project to some small administrative task, you lose momentum that takes time to rebuild. The solution is simple but powerful. Batch process your busy work during designated times and fiercely protect your creative blocks from interruption. This might mean setting specific hours for checking email and messages. It might mean having dedicated admin days where you handle the business side of your creative practice. It could even mean turning off notifications during your creative sessions. I make use of focus modes on my Apple devices that restricts the apps that are visible and the people who can contact me when I'm working. What's critical is creating clear boundaries between deep creative work and the shallow busy tasks that fragment our attention. I've found that 3 hours of focused, uninterrupted creative time produces far better results than 5 or 6 hours of fragmented attention. Quality comes from immersion, not just time spent. So there you have it, 4 powerful habits that you can use to transform your creative practice. Preparing your creative runway the day before, establishing a consistent warm-up ritual, changing how you relate to procrastination, and quarantining your busy work. None of these habits requires extraordinary willpower or superhuman focus. They're simple practices that work with your psychology rather than against it. And that's the secret to sustainable creative discipline. It's not about forcing yourself to create, it's about making it easier to do the work you already want to do. I'd love to hear which of these habits resonates most with you, or what other disciplined practices have worked in your creative life. If you're watching on YouTube, drop me a comment, or if you're listening on the audio podcast, I guess you're out of luck. No, I'm kidding. You can send me a message through my website, scottmclemore.com. And if you'd like to get deeper into trying to stay focused on creative work, I recommend you check out an episode I did recently about why forcing creativity never works and what actually does, which you can click on here. Thanks so much for hanging out. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.